Welcome to the Mind Myself podcast. I'm Esther, and it is my pleasure to be bringing you information about healthcare approaches, health issues, and people's health journey stories, all from the complementary, holistic, and integrative perspectives, helping you become your own best health advocate and helping you make your own informed choices because you matter. Welcome to Mind Myself Conversations with E. I'm Esther, and it is my pleasure to again welcome to our studio Elizabeth Bishop. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Esther. I'm so happy to be back and sharing ideas with you again. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about who you are, your credentials, and this great body of work that you've been involved in for quite some time.
Sure. So I have a background in human services of about 40 years and adult education for about 35 or so, and all geared with the adult education piece, all geared towards the academic preparation of people going into human services related fields for the most part. So social work and, fields like that, social services. So this has been a calling though for me since I was a teenager, and something that I absolutely love in terms of my vocation. And my educational background includes developmental services, bachelor in psychology and religious studies, and a master's in adult education. And I'm currently working on my doctoral degree with the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University in BC, to explore these ideas a little bit further, and specifically around the idea of service as an expression of love.
Wow, big mouthfuls there.
I know.
And well, given that we've talked about conscious service and this topic is about joy and fulfillment in the workplace, why do you love your work so much? Tell us about that.
I think I'm really blessed in that I knew, like, I was lit up for what I wanted to do. I mean, even prior to my teenage years and actually getting into the field, I always thought, well, I'll be a teacher. I always felt that way. As a little girl, I would teach in the basement by myself. And I loved school, loved learning, all of those things. And then it was through reading a book that I got turned on to the idea of working in developmental services. And it kind of, connected some dots for me from earlier in my life as well. That made sense, later in terms of my own experiences with other people. And I absolutely loved that work. I also hit the wall a few times in my work as a service provider, and my desire to overextend, to fix, to not be aware of what my role really was, and definitely came up against the wall. And the last time that happened to me, I was actually standing in the shower getting ready for work, and I heard myself saying over and over again, I just have to get to 4:30. Just get me through the day. Just got to get to 4:30. And I realized I had been doing that for quite some time, this mantra, and it was sort of almost like, you're white knuckling it, you're all tense. And I thought, what happened? Like this, where did it go? So that was my turning point. And I decided that from now on, everything I do, I had to be able to feel and sense the meaning in it for me. It had to be relevant and have meaning. And, sometimes that's just a matter of shifting your perspective, and not everything had meaning right away, but it set a touchstone. I created a touchstone for myself. And from there, things flourished. So as soon as I was able to sort of tap into, well, what really matters to me now, and in this work, and how would I like to contribute, and found ways to do that with a supportive employer, for sure, my whole experience of my work changed, and I tapped back into that joy and fulfillment, and it hasn't gone away since.
Wow, that's fantastic. Excuse me. I think a lot of people in the world do not find joy and fulfillment in work, but they feel a bit trapped.
Yeah.
Well, let's do some definitions. What does it actually mean? What does joy mean? And what does fulfillment mean in the context of our work?
Well, to me, I think more so than, say, defining it intellectually, it would be about tuning in and noticing what it feels like in your body, and then noticing, well, how does that connect then to what I think and the thoughts that I have about something? And at the same time, what's in contrast to that? Like you and I both know we learn through contrast too, right?
Indeed.
So being in tune with those cues, like, oh, I'm in a joyful place, I'm feeling this really excites me, I'm enthusiastic, I have a lot of passion. Like those are words that I would use to describe what that feels like for me. And then noticing those times where it falls flat, like this is not really something I feel aligned with, whatever it might be, and just noticing the contrast and choosing more in the direction of the things that bring joy. So I think it is an embodied experience from that perspective. And then fulfillment for me ties back to that sense of meaning. Like I see the relevance, this matters to me. Have you ever found yourself going, oh, why am I even doing this? Like, does this even matter to me? Why am I doing it? You know, to me, that's unfulfilling.
Yes, I have. And there are parts, even if I'm doing something joyful and fulfilling, excuse me, overall, that every once in a while, I have those feelings and those moments of going, oh, I'd rather not be doing this. But it's a part, because that's part of living too,
Absolutely.
Is with that.
And sometimes too, I'm just going to say something I've noticed lately, would like I'll wake up in the morning sometimes and I have a perfectly wonderful day ahead of things that I like doing and people I'm going to be connecting with. But I'll have this sort of feeling of, oh, like some kind of dread, or I don't feel like doing it. So the last few times that's happened, I've thought, like, what's happening here? You know, is this really how you feel about what's going on now? Or is this a feeling that you got used to waking up with from, 20 years ago? And so like, is that really the way that you're feeling? And I think, no, actually, I'm looking forward to today. And I love the way my day is going to flow. This is great. And suddenly it shifts. And it's not like I'm trying to, BS myself. The truth is, I really am looking forward to the work that I'm going to be doing, and it matters to me. I see the relevance, I see the connections. So it's interesting. I think of those things as emotional habits.
Yeah, that makes sense. And my partner, Bill, often says, feelings are just feelings. Yeah. They're not necessarily what's true. They're just the feelings that I'm experiencing in a given moment. So when I allow myself to be present and feel those, then I get some choice about what I can do with those.
Exactly. And they're full of information. Like it's just telling us, oh, this is how I'm interpreting this right now. This is how I'm experiencing whatever's going on. This is what's come up. Like it's just beautiful, rich information for us to know about what's going on in our overall experience. And it's like, that's where the richness is. Can you imagine what life would be like without any feelings, any emotional energy?
Totally. It'd be pretty dull.
Totally.
Yeah.
Even though we don't like it when we're in the dumps.
No, for sure. But it's the whole range, right?
It is.
So let's talk about the cultures of well-being or not in our workplaces and how we might enhance that or bring that to fruition more.
Okay, so I'll use some examples, of course, from the workplaces that I know about and work with, because that's what I know, which is always related to human services and healthcare. But I have an interesting little, I think it's funny. So this was years and years ago. In fact, I started thinking that it was only in the last few years that I started really honing in on this idea of joy and fulfillment as an element of the work that I was doing. But this actually happened probably about a decade ago. And I was putting together a workshop, and I was asking, it was a social work association, if they would share with their audience to promote the workshop. And they said, absolutely, write up the description, everything else. So I went ahead and did that and submitted it. And then they came back and said, we want you to change some of the wording. You've used the words joy and fulfillment, and they aren't evidence-based. That's not evidence-based language. And I thought, yeah, you're probably right. I bet there's a lot of social workers who have no evidence of joy and fulfillment in their work. I didn't say that out loud. I just thought about it, but I thought it was so funny. Now, come here 10 years later, one of my colleagues and I, she got a request for proposals for workshops from an association for social workers, and we submitted one that we had done before. Of course, it includes the words joy and fulfillment and breath work and all kinds of things like that. And they came back and said, yeah, we're pretty sure we're going to want to do this, so we'll get back to you later in January. So evolution, which I just think is mind-blowing, but there's a lot of complexity around joy and fulfillment in the workplace. And we had a Vancouver Foundation funded project a couple of years ago. It was a develop grant to kind of gather some information. And so we were looking to speak with people who we were referred to as direct service providers. So people who were working in healthcare and social services directly with people in the community, and to get their lived experience about how they experience well-being. Joy and fulfillment is an element of well-being, equity in the workplace, those kinds of things. And we heard from a few people saying that they didn't feel they had permission to tap into their sense of joy and fulfillment in the workplace, which I think probably speaks a bit to privilege and equity. And then the other part, when we asked for examples of well-being in the workplace, all of the examples were things that we do outside of work: breaks, vacations, mental health days, sick days, more time away. So no evidence that people could point to readily about here's what I do to feel well in the actual delivery of my work, delivery of service.
So important.
Mind-blowing.
So important.
So it just says to me, it speaks to me of a disconnect. And I think that we naturally, as human beings, we will disconnect from ourselves when we're uncomfortable and don't feel like we have the strategies to respond. And I think it's one of the really big areas of concern for people in healthcare and social services, because we're kind of conditioned, I think, first of all, hardwired to give, find it difficult to receive, and then conditioned to believe that our work is all about other people and that we are really just, it's not about us. You know, leave work at home, like work at work and home at home, leave your values at the door. It's not your values, but we're informed by all those things. So
Absolutely.
conscious service and joy and fulfillment, to me, are key elements in how we decide how we're going to show up in that role and contribute and receive.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us some practical examples of things to do in a workplace? And I know your focus has been social services and mental health in a certain way, but anybody who has any kind of a job in any kind of service or a difficult job situation could benefit from what I think that you're about to say. So practical examples.
Practical examples of tapping into your joy and fulfillment. Well, first of all, you need to know, right? You need to know what those things are. And I think historically, a lot of that kind of work has been around identifying strengths and weaknesses, what you can do well and what you don't do well. But just because we can do something well doesn't necessarily mean that we enjoy it or that it's fulfilling or meaningful for us. So it's to really dig down deep and what does provide that space of joy for me and enthusiasm. And it may not be a direct, maybe you love to cook. I'll give you an example. We had, I worked for a brain injury rehab program, and we started talking about all of these kinds of ideas and how did people want to contribute and what did they love about work and those kinds of things. And one woman was actually getting right into cooking all the time because it was right at the dawn of the Food Network. So she was constantly making all these dishes and then coming into work and saying, I made this and my family loved this, and on about cooking. And then all of a sudden it dawned on her, hey, why don't I start a community kitchen? And it just doing that one project and having the support to do that one project elevated her whole experience of work. So finding where you feel like you can really contribute in a meaningful way that lights you up, that energizes you and feels fulfilling and joyful.
Right. So being intentional about that.
Yes. Yeah, because sometimes we think we got to wait for an employer to create the space for us to do it. But I really feel like we need to know what it is so that when the space opens up, we can walk right through. And then also sharing, like, this is what I'm really interested in, what I really love to do. I'd like more opportunity for this. Tells people around you what you're about. And then it starts getting people, in a way, being able to energetically support you and create opportunities and come to you when they know that something's happening that they know you'll love.
Well, that's cool. And so intentional, being intentional, putting that out. And then what's next? Once you've identified the overarching thing or things that you really enjoy and love and put that out in the world, then what comes next? What are one or two other tips you could give us?
Well, I think you start taking steps towards that. Again, like in the last time we spoke, we talked about the importance of personal responsibility. So really understanding that if I want to experience this in my life, then I have to make it up to me to start taking those steps, and knowing that there's going to be there might be some barriers, or there might be some hoops to jump through, or you might have to, ask here and receive some no's and then keep on asking and finding the space. But if we're doing things because we absolutely love doing it, and again, detaching from the outcome, like we discussed before as well, then the path starts to open up, like just trusting that it will start to open up. Follow what feels good. And that doesn't mean we throw everything away and I'm going to quit my job and go and, do whatever some people do. Most of us don't have that sense of security to be able to do that. So making sure you feel safe and secure, taking the steps that you can, asking for the resources and supports, and just tuning in as that evolves and you learn more about what it means for you.
Great advice. And what about, we talk about boundary setting. How does that fit into this conversation?
Well, one of the things I've been playing with recently, one of the other pieces that came out of my my research that sort of evolved as part of the conscious service approach is something I call the engagement continuum. So in the center would be where we're engaged, which is of course the sweet spot. And then on one end, we have enmeshment, and on the other end, estrangement, where we come out of that space of engagement. So in one end of the spectrum, we've totally lost ourselves in something. We don't know where we end and the other person begins. And on the other end, we are shutting down and saying no more. And I like to think about boundary setting in a new way by using that engagement piece, because I think that boundaries are fluid, our engagement levels are fluid. And quite often when we talk about boundaries, we talk about drawing a line in the sand that we then have to watch other people to not step over. And when we talk about our level of engagement, we're coming from a more self-focused and personally responsible, self-responsive space to say, this is how far I can go today. This is how far I'll go in this dynamic or this interaction or this project, whatever it is. And let that be the source of information, because other people's behavior is never going to be something that we can do anything about.
Nope, not a bit.
No. And there's freedom in just being able to come back to, well, what step can I take now? Or what perspective can I shift right now, if that's all we can do?
Right. Wow, this is such a rich conversation about pursuing what makes us feel alive and joyful and fulfilled.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to say on the topic that we haven't covered so far in this very short conversation?
I think the only other piece from the broader sort of systemic level, because we do have a lot of conversation out there about employee engagement. And I know I've read recently some headlines of articles that said that, a person's sense of fulfillment and happiness was not necessarily, aligned with engagement, or that well-being wasn't necessarily a part of engagement. And I have a hard time wrapping my mind around that. I have to wonder what the definition of engagement is. So sometimes I think from that level, engagement is following the rules and following the policies and being a productive performer and, doing what the employer wants you to do. But engagement really is a reciprocal kind of energy. So nobody else is responsible for our level of engagement. We aren't responsible for another person's engagement. But I always find, and you probably do too, Esther, that the more engaged I feel in the moment, the more likely I'm going to notice evidence of engagement around me as well, and reciprocity.
Absolutely. Yeah. No question. No question. The more engaged I feel, the more, that's such a good word. The more entwined I am, I guess, more motivated in what I'm doing, the better I feel. And the more it attracts other people too.
Exactly. The investment. And I think about, the work that I do and being in the human services field, a big part of, a vital element of that, and it's vital to any of our relationships, work or otherwise, is the emotional labor, emotional investment. That's part of what we have to do with each other as human beings. It's not like, too much emotional labor. It's how we create relationship. We have to be emotionally connected. Otherwise, it's not there. You don't have that relational space.
It's how we be human together.
That's right.
Yeah. So what's one thing you'd like to leave your listener with today?
I would say that let's really, I think of well-being as a holistic experience, of course, which is something I think many of us talk about and have talked about for a long time. The physical aspects, the emotional, the intellectual or mental, and the spiritual aspects. And I think our sense of joy and fulfillment in our life, including our vocation, is a key element in well-being. And it's an absolute indicator, of well-being as well. I mean, if we go for a long period of time not feeling joyful and fulfilled, we're probably not feeling well either. And there's probably all kinds of other things going on. So I think it can be a really quick cue in terms of that self-responsive approach as well to noticing, where am I at in my well-being, and how is this a barometer for how I want to contribute in the world and how I'm feeling. And I just feel like if our workplaces were filled with joyful and fulfilled people, imagine what kind of service and quality we would be offering in the world. Huge.
Totally. Perfect ending. Thank you so much
you.
for being at the Mind Myself podcast today and for sharing your wisdom and your joy and your fulfillment with us.
Thank you so much for having me back, Esther. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us at the Mind Myself podcast today. We know that time is precious and you've spent some of your valuable time with us. We're grateful. If you would like to reach out to our guest directly, the information is below. And if you would like more from Mind Myself, that information is also below. Please visit our website and check out all the information about the different complementary, holistic, and integrative healthcare approaches, information about health issues, more podcasts, tons of blogs, and we even have a community page for you where you could reach out and tell your story safely, or you could ask questions and perhaps somebody else in the world is going through something similar to you. In any case, we're so glad you're with us, and we're doing this because you matter.